It's hard for me to think of something more beautiful than lavender fields in bloom. Now, I've been around lavender farmland my whole life, but it still takes my breath away to see the ground painted bright purple in contrast to the beautiful blue sky, especially at sunset. And of course, the smell. There's nothing like it. It's no wonder that the lavender fields have inspired works by Monet, Van Gogh, and many, many more. Hello and welcome to Young Living's podcast, The YL Drop. My name is Jacob Young, your host. This podcast will provide you with drops of information about Young Living, like stories, history, products, lots of little fun facts, and even more. Young Living is the world leader in producing and distributing premium quality essential oils. With that being said, we're also going to give you an opportunity to win this bottle right here. Stay tuned for that. In this episode, we're going to talk about lavender. And we can't have a discussion about lavender that doesn't involve France and its world-famous lavender fields. Joining me today is Jean-Noel Landel, who grew up in Provence region and who has been involved commercially in lavender for over 40 years. Welcome, Jean-Noel. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you, Jacob. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Wild Drop. It's always great to have you here. Jean-Noel and I have many, many memories shared with my dad, especially. And just want to say thank you once again for coming on. So, Jean-Noel, we'd really like you to quickly kind of go over your various experiences as a farmer, distiller, liaison with other farmers, and kind of just how you got into farming with lavender, if you'd like to touch up on that a little bit.
Oh, it dates back to when I was a very young boy, during the vacation at my grandma's house. There used to be, those little lavender sachets that we put to protect the clothes from moth. And I loved that smell so much. I used to take one of those sachets and put it under my pillow. And I would sleep with the smell of lavender when I was very, very young. And to me, the connection between the smell of lavender and happiness came up with me. So I always loved lavender smell. So then in 1970, I opened a health food store. And at that time, in the 70s, there was no aromatherapy at all, But we were selling 3 different essential oils: lavender, eucalyptus, and orange. That's all. And I was so happy to discover essential oils at that time. Then I met with my wife, Jane, in the 80s. We lived in the US, didn't do anything with lavender at that time. But coming back from the US in 1986, I enjoyed going for vacation or just little trips to the lavender fields in the south of France. And I told Jane, I remember, I want to work here. I love it so much. So I made contacts with different people around, and I got a good job to take care of exportation of lavender essential oils for a co-op of lavender grower. And that's how it started in 1989.
I love it. And so with that being said, you have vast knowledge and history about lavender. You've told me that you know the history of lavender from the Egyptians to the Greeks and the Romans. Could you touch up a little bit on that as well?
Lavender in Latin, lavandula comes from the notion of lavare, that means to wash up, to clean. Because very early, the ancient Romans discovered that by just putting some lavender, even rubbing lavender flowers, would kind of kill the germs, bacteria, and so on. So it has been considered as one of the best way to treat yourself against all kind of disease linked to bacteria or germs. The distillation, there are different point of views. Some people say alembic. alambic is the name for a distiller, and that comes from Arabic. So people think that they invented the distillation system. I also know that the Romans used to do some kind of distillation by putting the plants in water. They would boil the water, and above the water, they would just put a sheet, a drape, and the steam will go up through the cloth. You see what I mean? Ex- Excuse my English, but it would capture the cloth would capture the essential oils, and then they would just press the cloth and get the liquid that was half water and some essential oil in it. That was a form of distillation.
Wow. So that was kind of
That's it.
the early inventions of the gooseneck and the condenser in a way. That's really, really
Yeah.
impressive. Wow. So with you knowing all this vast knowledge about lavender and coming into the world of lavender, can you talk a little bit about how lavender was used in the early years of France with the perfume? And you said that there was a comment that you made a while back when we did our Zoom call to begin with, something about the stinky French lavender that you talked about. Can you touch on that as well?
Jacob, I don't understand what you mean by sticky French. What does that
Stinky.
mean? Oh, stinky. Okay, I got it. Yes. Well, in the Middle Age,
Hmm.
we didn't have showers, or it was rare to take bath, but no shower. So people didn't wash up themselves very well. And one way of, as I said before, clean yourself was the use of perfumes. And that would also protect, from disease. And in a way, it would be a way of washing yourself. So that's how the first perfumes were invented. It was in order to get rid of bacteria and bad smell. That was very common. That was, around the Middle Age that it started to be used for that. You know the story of the four thieves, don't you?
um, with um, with how they were robbing the graves, right?
Okay, that was during those big plagues, that were killing millions of people in the Middle Age.
Yep.
And there were four thieves in the south of France who were able to rob the dead people from the very deadly disease without catching the sickness ever. So once the authorities caught them, they found a way to give them their recipe.
Hmm.
And they were using a vinegar at that time, in which they would just let sit many different plants, aromatic plants. And after that, they would put their clothes in it, and they would rub their whole body with this mixture. And that was a way to protect themselves from catching the plague. And that's how they could rob dead people that were very contagious anyway. And
Wow.
they would never catch the. So it shows really the power of essential oils,
That it does. And they robbed them of their jewelry, of their clothes. What did they rob off of them exactly?
Well, they would put their clothes in this liquid, made of vinegar and aromatic plants, and they would also rub their face, their arms, their body,
Uh-huh.
kind of, and that was a way to protect themselves. So I don't say it was a perfume because I didn't smell this mixture, but
And it's
that's
not a
that
good
was
smell. Yeah, that sounds like a mixture that probably wouldn't smell too good at all. And you're right, it does show the true power of the essential oils and just how amazing they are and how they work. So talk to me about how essential oils were brought to Pasadena, California, and you kind of visiting and exploring the essential oil world. Something about meeting this mysterious cowboy who would one day save the lavender industry in France.
Uh, it was in 1990. My son Nicolas was 6 months old. And I, as I told you before, just started to be a distiller myself for about a year. And I decided to go to the US and find out what the situation with essential oils was. I had no idea. We didn't have internet at that time.
Yeah.
So I had no idea if there was a market for it or what was going on about essential oils. So I went to Pasadena to a big health show. It was a professional health show, I remember, with hundreds of booths, people showing their products. So I went there with a few bottles of lavender oil, rosemary, thyme oil, whatever we were distilling in Provence at that time. And I did a tour of the whole show with no success at all. I mean, nobody knew about essential oils, even less than in France. But about midday, I saw a very little booth that said on top of it, and that was the only one, aromatherapy essential oils. Well, I said, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And that gave me a big smile. So then I met a cowboy there. That was your father, Jacob. He was right in front of the booth. And all I did was take a bottle of lavender oil out of my pocket, handed it to him. He opened it, smelled it, and he looked at me. I still remember his face with a big smile. Then I knew he was a connoisseur because I knew my product was pure and natural, And he said, well, if you distill that in France, I always wanted to go to France and participate in the cultivation and distillation of lavender oil. Can I come and see you? And that was the first contact we had. And I had no idea that one day this cowboy would save the true lavender growers in France. And this is just the amazing part of this whole story we had together.
Wonderful. And what a great beginning to our next part of the segment. But before we get there, let's take a quick 60-second break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome to the giveaway where you can win this 15 milliliter bottle of lavender essential oil. All you need to do is go to this YouTube video and comment down below which is your favorite lavender field, whether it be the one in St. Mary's, Idaho, the one in Mona, Utah, or the one in Provence, France. For rules and regulations, click on the link that is in the description for this YouTube video. The winner will be announced the following Tuesday on all social media for the YL Drop. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at the YL Drop. Good luck, and we'll see you there. All right, and we're back. So, Jean-Noel, you talked and kind of touched upon the story of how you met my dad, how you were first introduced to him. What followed after that? You talked about how my dad wanted to go and visit France and how he wanted to be part of the cultivation and learn more there. What followed after meeting my dad in Pasadena?
Well, I had mixed feelings. I first thought how a cowboy could be interested in lavender. That was kind of weird to me. And then I had a good feeling of confidence that this man was trustworthy. And he said, I always wanted to go to France, but I have a big problem. I don't speak French. I have no connection there. Can I come and visit you? And about 6 months later, in the middle of winter at 5 p.m., he just landed in Paris. And we were at that time about 10 hours drive from Paris, And he said, how can I get to your place? And I said, well, I will see you tomorrow, I guess. And I learned after that he rented a little car and he slept in his car on his way, for a few hours. And just arrived the next morning as soon as he could, because he was in a hurry to meet with Lavender and myself and the distillation.
So, after driving through the night and spending a few hours in his car, when he finally arrived, what all did my dad learn? What did you teach him? What was the process through all of that?
When Gary arrived, he was mostly interested in the techniques of farming and the techniques of distilling. But you can imagine we had very long conversation about essential oils and lavender every night. Uh, and what I discovered already at that time, he had much more knowledge on essential oils, what we could do with essential oils, than what we had in France. And that was kind of impressive. It was so astonishing for us. For example, lavender has different properties. Mostly, one of them is to calm down by just, breathing it. And we didn't know that in France. We were the French doctors who were prescribing lavender were only prescribing it as a way to treat minor cuts or wounds, burns, and that's all. But Gary was bringing what I would call a psychological or even spiritual use of essential oil that we had no idea about. So that was very, very interesting. All my friends, like Marcel, who was my teacher as a distiller, would come over, very often just to listen about what Gary knew about it. But in terms of cultivation, farming, he had some very good basic knowledge, but he could learn a lot from the French growers that had been distilling for almost 100 years. So he was very happy to share, because that's how I would consider your dad. He was always sharing his information, and he would use other people's information. And that's important in life.
Yes, that it is. He always made sure to acquire as much knowledge as he possibly could. So, with being there and learning all the cultivation, the distillation, and the techniques, can you talk a little bit about the farm that is there in France that we currently have?
Yeah, that happened many years after the first meeting, of course. I think it happened in 2002, because since the beginning, Gary told me we need to find a farm so we could farm our own lavender in France. But that was very difficult to find land for farming. So it took us about 10 years to find the right place. The idea of Gary was to control the quality of the oil, because, as I mentioned before, at that time, essential oils were mostly used for perfume industry. And there was a lot of cheating on quality of the oils. They would, mix the oil with other synthetic products. And to Gary, it was like a crime. And he said, if we have difficulties to find genuine, pure essential oils, we have to control the production of it. So we found a farm in 2002, and we started cultivation. And most of all, we made cooperation with other growers around the farm. And that was very important. We could produce all the quantity that Young Living was using already at that time, because the need for Young Living was so big. So I had to make good deals with other growers, but I could control their quality, because we would distill together as a co-op, and I would know exactly what they were producing. And that's how we could develop the production for Young Living.
So, Jean-Noel, with all the traits and the knowledge that he took from being in time with you and in France and learning, did he apply all of that knowledge with the farm that he built and constructed in St. Mary's, Idaho? Because from what I remember, he took some lavender from France and started growing it in St. Mary's. Do you have any stories or any information you can share on that?
Yes, I remember he was eager to start growing lavender in Idaho. And he took the best seeds because we went all the way up to the top of the mountains to get wild lavender seeds, not cultivated seeds.
Yeah.
So those were the best you could have. He brought them back in his pocket or whatever. And he started cultivating in Idaho. We had doubts it would work because the soil in Idaho was so different from the soil we have in France. So we were a little bit worried it wouldn't work. But as a matter of fact, Gary was smart enough to balance the soil by bringing in other components that would allow to grow lavender, and he was very successful.
So, Jean Noel, after my dad visited France, after a while, he had heard about an issue with the lavender fields, a disease that was killing the lavender. What exactly was going on there?
Was what was going on was that at that time we were developing cultivation of cloned lavender instead of just population lavender grown from seeds. Clone lavender is like when you take a plant and make a starter out of it. You take a little piece of the plant and you replant it. So all the other plants will be exact twins, exact same plant than the original one. A population lavender will be grown from seeds only. And like a population, each plant is different. But then, when you have huge fields of clone lavender, if one insect will go on one plant of the field, then they will go all over to the same plants that are next to them, and that would kill the field. If they go to a population lavender, the next plant may be stronger than the first one who caught a little bit and that would stop the development of this illness. You see what I mean?
Yes, it would stop the spread of the disease.
And that was a very important point for Gary. He studied that for a long time, and he said, the only way we can save the lavender is to grow population lavender from seeds. And that's exact. Then you need to know that growing from seeds gives you a very low yield per acres, for example.
Yes.
Much lower than cloned lavender that have been selected mostly for their quantity of oil produced per acre. But even so, but the quality of population lavender is much better than clone lavender anyway. So even so, the yield was much lower. Gary pushed that we kept cultivating population lavender for him. Other companies, mostly perfume industry, all they were looking for was a good price. And clone lavender was much cheaper than population lavender. The clone lavender is a much weaker plant. And then when you have an illness coming on the field, it would kill the whole field.
With this illness that was going around with the lavender, were there any farmers or crops in particular that lost their lavender or that almost lost their lavender?
Absolutely. Many farmers lost their lavender, and some of them went bankrupt.
With finding out that the population lavender helped prevent the spread of the disease, did you share this information with the other farmers that were struggling with their lavender fields as well? And if so, what was the result from that? Were they able to regrow their lavender? Were they able to have lavender back on their fields? What happened after that?
Oh, that was a very important discussions we had with the growers. First of all, your dad said, I want population lavender oil.
The true lavender.
Lavender oil. So the grower said, because they were ready to go for cloned lavender, since the yield was better, so money was better, and so on. But then when Gary promised he would buy all their population lavender for Young Living, they would stop growing clone lavender in the mountain. They would still grow it in the valleys, down, in the valleys. But in the mountain area, they would go back to population lavender, when in fact, if they had gone to clone lavender in the mountain, they would have disappeared because their yield in the mountain was much lower than the yield in the valleys, and they could compete with the valley growers. And that's how really Gary saved those growers by making them grow population lavender.
And population lavender is known today as the true lavender, correct?
Absolutely. And also from an environmental point of view, it's much more important to keep the any plant, and in particular lavender, almost as it was wild. That means the weak plants will die, but the strong plants will survive. And then they will make more seeds from strong, parents. And that's how we keep the biodiversity. And that's important as well,
Wow.
Not with clone lavender. You don't do that with clone lavender.
Wow. Amazing. And so lavender was brought back to life yet once again in France after the population seed discovery was brought to all the growers. And lavender nowadays is fine, right? There's no issue. The illness is pretty much gone from lavender, right?
It's getting much better. Yeah, much better than it used to be 20 years ago. That's for sure.
All right, Jean-Noel, we've talked about the illness and how lavender was brought back to life in France. And one thing I just want to touch up on really quick is I remember this vision of lavender that my dad shared with you back in the 90s that absolutely seemed ridiculous to you. But now because of that vision, essential oils is larger than the perfume industry in France and all across the entire world. Can you touch up on that as well?
Oh, yes, I can. And I totally agree. When Gary in the 1990 first came, and at that time, there was no aromatherapy, nowhere. I mean, just a little bit through some French doctors. But it was so tiny, I would say 99% of the production of lavender would go to the perfume industry at that time. And when Gary, first of all, started to talk about the potential of using essential oils for health, for wellness, I had doubts about it. And he said, Jean-Noel, one day you will see that the need of essential oil for aromatherapy will be very, very big, maybe even bigger than the need for the perfume industry. And I didn't believe it, and nobody believed it. And everybody was kind of laughing at him. But in fact, that happened about 15 years after he said so. So he was right once again.
Well, Jean-Noel, it has been a long time and an amazing journey throughout these last 30 years with my dad, and 40, 50 plus years for you with lavender. And I really want to thank you for your time being on the podcast with us here and sharing all of your knowledge, your information, and your stories. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I'm thinking of your dad, Jacob. He completely changed my vision of lavender in particular and on essential oil. And I was such a challenge, when I first met him. But it has been so rewarding to follow your dad, and working with him for 30 years was a blessing for me. So, absolutely. And my whole family.
Yes. Well, and thank you for being part of our family and helping us along the way and continuing his legacy. And I, for one, have enjoyed lavender for as long as I can remember. And we're just extremely fortunate that today, with lavender's beauties and that its benefits are so accessible to everyone. And I can't help but thank you for all of your efforts, Jean-Noel, and your son's efforts, Nicholas, as well, with helping make sure that lavender thrives in its glorious purple form. For all of you who have not seen the lavender fields in person, in full bloom, up close, please make sure to put it on your list. Lastly, thank you once again so much, Jean-Noel, for coming on to our show today and talking and sharing your stories and your experiences with the lavender and how lavender was saved and just the whole history behind it. Thank you all so much for watching this episode. Don't forget to oil up. This is Jacob Young, dropping out. Take care.